Julian interrupts the Beatles concert. John Lennon's reaction leaves the audience silent. New York City, August 15th, 1965. Shea Stadium. The Beatles were gods that night. 55,000 people screaming, crying, losing their minds. The biggest concert in rock and roll history. John Lennon stood at the microphone, guitar slung across his chest, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. He was singing Twist and Shout. Voice raw, powerful, electric. But something was wrong. John kept glancing toward the wings, distracted, unfocused. Paul noticed, George noticed. Ringo kept drumming, but even he felt it. Something was pulling John's attention away from 55,000 screaming fans. Then, he stopped singing, mid-verse. Just stopped. The band kept playing for a few seconds. Then, silence. 55,000 people went quiet. Confused, worried. John was staring at the side of the stage, and a small figure standing in the shadows. A little boy, maybe 2.5 years old, blonde hair catching the stage lights, clutching a stuffed animal, looking lost, terrified. Julian, John's son. Julian Charles Buchanan Lennon. The child John had been running from since the day he was born. And now, he was standing on the biggest stage in the world, alone. John Lennon was a genius, a revolutionary, an icon, a voice of a generation. But father? That was a role he'd abandoned. Julian was born April 8, 1963, in Liverpool, while Beatlemania was exploding. The product of a marriage John never wanted. To Cynthia Powell, the quiet art school girl who loved him when he was nobody. But fame corrupts everything it touches, and John, he let it corrupt him completely. By 1965, he barely knew his son, barely acknowledged his existence. The Beatles consumed everything, every breath, every thought, every moment of his life. Cynthia raised Julian alone in their Weybridge mansion, while John traveled the world, screamed at by millions, worshipped like a deity. Julian would ask, "Where's Daddy?" And Cynthia would lie, "Working, darling, making music." But the truth was darker. John was running from responsibility, from the life he never chose, from the boy who looked exactly like him. Brian Epstein, the Beatles' manager, had made it clear. Keep the wife and kid hidden. Bad for the image, bad for business. And John? He was happy to oblige, because facing Julian meant facing his own failures, and John Lennon didn't do failure. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. August 15th, 1965. Shea Stadium, New York City. Cynthia had brought Julian to America, a desperate attempt to reconnect the family. They were supposed to watch from a private box, hidden from cameras, safe from the madness. But Julian was 2.5 years old, and 2-year-olds don't understand rules. While Cynthia spoke with security about bathroom locations, Julian wandered through corridors filled with screaming teenagers, past guards too distracted by the chaos to notice one small child. The noise drew him, the vibration of 55,000 voices, the thunder of drums, until he found himself backstage. The lights were blinding, the sound was deafening, the energy was terrifying, and there on that massive stage was the man from the photographs, Daddy. John was mid-verse in Twist and Shout when he saw him. That small figure, that blonde hair, those eyes that mirrored his own. The guitar went silent. Paul kept singing for a moment, then stopped. George's guitar faded. Ringo's drums died. 55,000 people sensed something catastrophic was happening. John walked to the edge of the stage, microphone forgotten. Julian? His voice barely a whisper, but the stadium microphones caught it, amplified it, sent it through the entire venue. 55,000 people heard John Lennon say his son's name, and the world stopped. Security rushed toward Julian, but John held up his hand. Don't touch him. Shea Stadium had never been so quiet. You could hear the wind, the distant traffic, people breathing. John knelt at the edge of the stage, eye level with his son. "Jules, what are you doing here, mate?" Julian didn't answer, just stared, clutching his stuffed rabbit tighter. The boy had seen his father on television, in newspapers, in magazines, but never like this. Never close enough to touch. I wanted to see you," Julian finally said, his voice small, uncertain, amplified through the stadium speakers. John's face did something 55,000 people had never seen before. It crumbled. The sharp-tongued Beatle, the irreverent genius, the man who mocked everyone and everything. He was crying, "Oh, Jules, oh, my boy." John climbed down from the stage, right there in front of 55,000 people. He picked up his son, held him close, the stuffed rabbit crushed between them. "I'm sorry," John whispered. But the microphone on stage caught it, amplified it, sent it through the entire stadium. "I'm so sorry, Julian. I've been a terrible father." The audience wasn't screaming anymore. They were crying. Every single person in that stadium understood what they were witnessing. Not a concert, not a performance, a reckoning. Paul McCartney stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. George Harrison had turned away, unable to watch. Ringo Starr was openly sobbing behind his drums. This wasn't the Beatles anymore. This was a man facing the consequences of his choices. John carried Julian back onto the stage. The other Beatles stood uncertain, unsure what to do. John sat down, cross-legged, his son in his lap, and he started talking. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is my son, Julian. He's 2.5 years old, and I've been the worst father in the world to him." The honesty was brutal, raw, unfiltered. "I've been so caught up in all of this," he gestured at the stage, the lights, the massive crowd, "that I forgot about the most important thing, him." Cynthia had made her way backstage. She stood in the wings, tears streaming down her face. "I thought being a Beatle meant everything," John continued. "I thought the music, the fame, the screaming girls, I thought that was what mattered." He looked down at Julian, who was playing with his father's collar, oblivious to the 55,000 watching, but it doesn't. None of it matters if I'm not there for him. The silence in Shea Stadium was absolute. I've missed everything. His first steps, his first words, every birthday, every moment that actually matters. I've missed his entire life because I was too busy being John Lennon. He paused, voice breaking. "But I'm also Julian's dad, and I forgot that. I forgot him." Paul McCartney, standing behind them, was openly weeping. George Harrison had his head bowed, shoulders shaking. Ringo Starr was wiping his eyes with his sleeve. This wasn't a concert anymore. This was a confession. A public admission of failure from a man who'd never admitted failure at anything. Brian Epstein, watching from the wings, knew this moment would change everything. The carefully constructed image, the manufactured perfection, all of it was crumbling. And John didn't care. John looked up at the massive crowd. "I can't take back the time I've lost. I can't undo the damage I've done." Julian was falling asleep against his father's chest. The warmth, the heartbeat, the safety he'd never known before. "But I can promise you this, and I'm saying it in front of all of you, so I can't take it back." He adjusted Julian in his arms, held him closer. "From this moment on, I'm going to be a father, a real father. Not just a name on a birth certificate, not just someone who sends money home." The audience was completely still. "I'm going to be there. For bedtime stories, for scraped knees, for nightmares, for all the little moments that actually matter." He looked at Cynthia in the wings. She was sobbing. "I'm going to be the man my son deserves, even if it means being less of a Beatle." That statement sent shockwaves through the venue. Less of a Beatle? John Lennon was willing to sacrifice the biggest band in the world for his son? "Music will always be part of my life," John continued, "but it can't be my whole life. Not anymore. Not when I have someone who needs me more than any audience ever could." He stood up. Julian still sleeping in his arms. "Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for witnessing this. And thank you for reminding me what actually matters." He walked off stage, the concert unfinished. The Beatles set incomplete. But something more important had happened. A father had found his son. Paul, George, and Ringo followed him off stage. 55,000 people stood in silence. Then, slowly, they began to applaud. Not the screaming hysteria of Beatlemania, but respectful, emotional, understanding. They had witnessed something sacred. The Shea Stadium concert became legend. Not for the music, but for what happened when the music stopped. John Lennon kept his promise. He didn't quit the Beatles, but he changed how he approached everything. He started coming home, started being present, started learning who Julian actually was. It wasn't perfect. John was still John, still complicated, still flawed, still sharp-edged and difficult. But he tried. And Julian remembered that night for the rest of his life. "That was the moment I got my father back," Julian said in interviews decades later. "Not the famous Beatle, not the icon. Just Dad." The bootleg recording of that night circulated for years. People didn't listen to it for the music. They listened to hear a man break down, admit his failures, promise to do better. In front of 55,000 witnesses, that's courage. Real courage isn't performing for millions. It's admitting you failed the one person who needed you most. The relationship between John and Julian was never easy. The damage had been done. Trust takes years to rebuild, but they had moments, real moments, father and son moments. John teaching Julian to play guitar, taking him to recording sessions, writing songs about him. "Beautiful boy, good night." Songs that showed the world John's softer side, the side that loved his son. Brian Epstein tried to spin the Shea Stadium incident, called it an emotional moment in press releases. But the fans knew better. They had witnessed the truth. And the truth was that John Lennon, for all his genius, had been running from the most important role of his life. Until a 2.5-year-old boy with a stuffed rabbit reminded him what actually mattered. Shea Stadium was demolished in 2008. But the memory of that night lives on, a reminder that sometimes the show must stop, because some things are more important than the applause. Some things are more important than fame. Some things are more important than being a legend, like being a father to a little boy with blonde hair and a stuffed rabbit, who just wanted to see his daddy. What do we sacrifice for success? And when do we realize we've sacrificed too much? John Lennon found his answer on a stage in front of 55,000 people. The question is, what's yours?